Alexis Newingham, December 10th, 2019. Okay, so today we are going to review the gastric phase of the digestion process. The gastric phase happens all in the stomach. So at the top of this slide, we have a reminder of the pathway food takes in the digestive system. Preceding the gastric phase is the cephalic phase, and following the gastric phase is the intestinal phase. The gastric phase begins when food enters the stomach and ends when food leaves the stomach. Therefore, we will begin by talking about the stomach as an organ. This bag-like organ begins just below the diaphragm and has three sections, including the fundus at the top, the central body in the middle, and the antrum at the bottom. The stomach also has a few functions that are extremely important to the body. It must store food, regulate what passes into the small intestine because a lot of food can't enter the small intestine at one time, and digest food into chyme. Chyme is a soupy mixture of food, enzymes, and mucus. And a last very important function of the stomach is to defend by destroying bacteria. There is some bacteria in the body that's good for it, but other bacteria needs to be destroyed. Okay, next we're going to move into the mechanics of the stomach. So basically, how does it work? What additions does it need to do the job that it needs to do? Well, we know that food enters the stomach and digestion happens, but it does have some helpers. The GI tract of the digestive system has 4 layers, which are shown here. The most inner layer is the mucosa. Then we have the submucosa, then we have the muscularis, and lastly the serosa. In the mucosa layer, the stomach is lined with gastric pits. These pits lead to gastric glands, which secrete gastric acid, also known as HCl, enzymes, hormones, and paracrine molecules. Now we're going to talk about the molecules secreted from these gastric glands. G cells are in the gastric glands that secrete gastrin into the blood, which releases acid. Pepsin and gastric lipase are 2 enzymes that are also secreted, which help break down food. Pepsin is specific for collagen, which helps us digest meat, and on the other hand, gastric lipase helps us digest triglycerides. Paracrine secretions include histamine, somatostatin, and intrinsic factor. Okay, as we can see here, there's a bigger view of the digestive system. We can see the stomach, which is leading into the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum, and the stomach and the small intestine are come together at the pyloric valve. Food in the top of the stomach remains quiet and is stored, while food in the lower stomach is being digested and prepared for the small intestine. The lower stomach is mixing food with digestive enzymes and acid and turning it into chyme so that it can slowly enter the small intestine through the pyloric valve. With each contraction, a small amount of chyme goes through the pylorus into the duodenum, or like we said, the top part of the small intestine. Chyme now enters the small intestine to start the last phase of digestion, which is the intestinal phase. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a review for certain words and phrases that came up during the PowerPoint. So, first phrase is gastric phase itself. So think about it for a second. Okay, so gastric phase happens in the stomach, is the second phase of digestion. Okay, next word, stomach. May sound easy, but think of the parts of the stomach, what its role is. Okay, so the stomach is a bag-like organ, sits just below the diaphragm, has three sections, the fundus, central body, and the antrum. Most important functions are to store food, regulate what passes into the small intestine, digest, and defend. Okay, next is gastric glands. What are these and what do they do? Okay, so these are in the parts of the stomach where, remember, there's gastric pits that lead down to gastric glands, and they are very important because G cells that are inside them secrete gastrin, which helps the body to release acid for the stomach. Okay, so pepsin and gastric lipase. Hint is ACE at the end of lipase. Okay, so these are two enzymes that are secreted in the stomach. Remember that pepsin is specific for collagen to digest meat, and gastric lipase is specific for triglyceride digestion. Okay, next word is chyme. What is chyme? When is it produced? Okay, so chyme is a soupy mixture of food, enzymes, and mucus, and it is produced in the bottom of the stomach so that small amounts of it can be sent into the small intestine, which leads us to our last phrase. Okay, last phrase is small intestine. What does it have to do with gastric phase? When does it come in? Okay, so the small intestine is the part of the digestion process where the food goes right after the gastric phase. So it's going to begin the intestinal phase, which we haven't gone over yet. But I would like you to remember that when food is digested in the lower stomach, only certain amounts of it can go through the pyloric valve into the small intestine at a certain amount of time. Okay, so there's going to be a review sheet that you can complete for the end of this lesson. Thank you.